Hello, welcome to Miss Rose's Story Time. That's Angus. He likes story time too, don't you, Angus? Do you have a pet that you like to read to? It's important to read 30 minutes every day. And that's what we try to encourage here with Miss Rose's Story Time. I'm trying to get this to turn around. Alright, so we're going to be reading Captain Bowditch, Chapter 8. And I hope this encourages you to read. We have where you can mail us at P.O. Box 232, Old Swainsboro Road, Twin City, Georgia 30471. I have homeschooled for over 20 years, so if you would like to glean from my growing pains and the things I've learned over all those years teaching to read and comprehend, I welcome you to write me and ask me your questions, and if I don't have the answers, I'll try to find them for you. And if you like to write or illustrate, you can send me your work and I can consider to read it. And if you have a reading suggestion, so I would appreciate for you to like, share, and subscribe to Miss Rose's Story Time, and to write us at 232 P.O. Box 232, Old Swainsboro Road, Twin City, Georgia. All right, let's begin. Put this in here. Ouch, my fingers. There we go. Carry on, Mr. Bowditch. Chapter 8. You can get the book on Amazon or your local library and read along. And if you have any questions, you can message or comment. I welcome your interaction. Let's see. Chapter 8. Page 61. Lock, Stock, and Bookkeeper. One Thursday late in October, Hab appeared in the door of the chandlery. "Ahoy! The ship!" he yelled. Grinning, he entered with the rolling walk of a man who is used to a pitching deck under his feet. That's like going back and forth. Or forward and back, I guess. Probably more back and forth. After he had shaken hands and slapped Nate on the back, he said, "What's y'all excitement in town? Soldiers all over the place, flags flying and drums beating. How'd you guess I'd get home just now?" Nate laughed with him, then said, "President Washington's touring the country. He'll be here today." That was our first president. "Washington?" Hab's eyes glowed. Am I lucky? You know, Nate, when a man's at sea, he doesn't know what's going on at home. Every time you get home, you feel like you've been asleep for 6 months. How's everyone? Nate gave him news of home. Mary was fine. Liza was prettier than ever. William was getting along fine in navigation school. Sammy was bright, but he wouldn't study. Lois had knitted a pair of socks all by herself. "And Father?" Hab asked. Nate shook his head. Father wasn't doing so well. Granny was right. When Mother died, Father lost his anchor and windward. For a moment, Hab's face was grim. He sighed and shook off his mood. "How soon can you close the shop? Then we'll go together and see them." "I have to ask Mr. Hodges," Nate told him. "What?" Then Hab must have remembered, too, the words of the indenture. Nate could not leave by day or by night without permission. Nate, when a man's on shipboard, it's "Aye, aye, sir," and you obey on the double. But at least when I'm in home port, I'm my own boss. Mr. Hodges came to shake hands with Hab. He said, "Nate, go along with Hab if you'd like. I'll close up. You needn't be back until tomorrow morning." Nate thanked him. Heb and Nate left the shop together and walked down the street through the milling crowds. For a while they were silent. Then Heb remarked, "Mr. Hodges is mighty nice, but it's still like being in jail, being indentured." "I don't spend much time thinking about it," Nate said. At 1 o'clock, they joined the crowd that was forming on Court Street. The officers of the town were first, then the ministers, the merchants, the mechanics, and the schoolmasters. That's like school teachers. With their students. They marched to the square near the entrance to Salem and separated into two lines, leaving the roadway open between for the parade to pass. With a ruffle of drums and a shrilling of fifes, remember that's kind of like a type of like horn instrument, the soldiers passed. The Salem regiment in their red coats and light trousers, the soldiers from Ipswich in blue and the Independents in red, and the artillery in black. It seemed to Nate every regiment looked smarter, stood straighter, and marched better than the last one. At last someone shouted the news. They had hoisted the flag at Grandern's Mill, 2 miles from town. That was a signal that Washington and his party were passing there. After a while, faintly at first, and then louder, came the shrilling fifes and the rat-a-tat-tat of the drums. He was coming! Nate heard the voice of Colonel Abbott of the Salem Regiment. "Attention!" The fifes and drums grew louder. The troops from Andover appeared in their dashing red uniforms, every button shining, leather gleaming. The cannon roared, a salute that shook the town. The church bells clanged. Then a great shout went up, for there was President Washington. A tall, commanding man, riding his horse back to enter the town. His coach and baggage wagon followed behind them. Nate didn't realize how he had been yelling and cheering until the president had passed and the troops had fallen in behind. Heb croaked, "I almost split my throat." Nate tried to answer and found he was croaking too. That night, Nate spent with his family watching the fireworks at the courthouse. The next day, Washington and his party went on to Ipswich. Soon, Heb sailed again. Then Nate's days and nights settled down once more to the steady grind of sailing by ash breeze, working all day in the chandlery. So remember, Heb's Nate's brother. Studying late every night, he was reading straight through Chambers' Encyclopedia now. "There's a little bit about everything in it," he told Dr. Bentley, "but every time I read a short article on something, I wish I had a whole book. For instance, astronomy. I wish I had a whole book. I'd like a whole book about that." Dr. Bentley said, "Isaac Newton's Principia is the book for you. That tells more about the stars than anything else. I have a copy. I'm going to Boston for a few days, but I'll try to send that over before I leave." And he hurried out on the chandlery. That afternoon, a youngster brought Nate the copy of the Principia. Nate was too busy even to open the book then, but all day as he worked, he kept smiling to himself. That evening, he hurried through his supper, went up to his room, and lighted a candle, smiling. He opened the book, a whole book about astronomy. the study of the stars. Disappointed, he stared at it. He couldn't read a word. He could figure out just enough to know that the book was written in Latin. Then another idea struck Nate. How long would it take to learn Latin so he could read the Principia? When Dr. Bentley got back Saturday, he'd ask him, but Nate couldn't wait that long to ask someone. The next day, he asked a Harvard graduate he knew how long it would take to learn Latin. Latin, Ellis Wilson said, it's mighty hard. And the time I was in school, I had nightmares over Latin. Nate showed him the copy of the Principia. How long would I have to study Latin to read this? Mr. Wilson threw up his hands. Enough Latin to read that? You need at least 8 years, I'd say, under a good teacher. On Saturday, Dr. Bentley dropped in at the channery. Well, Nate, how are you enjoying the Principia? It's in Latin. Of course, Dr. Bentley smiled. Latin is the language of scholars and scientists. Then they can all read each other's books. A very handy language, isn't it? I suppose it is handy, Nate said, if you know it, but I don't. Dr. Bentley stared. Dear me, I never thought of that. I wondered if I could learn Latin, Nate said. Of course, the very thing. Come see me this evening, Nate. That evening, Dr. Bentley said, here you are, a grammar, a dictionary, and by the way, do you know your Bible well? Yes, sir, but it's in English. Dr. Bentley chuckled. It's in Latin too, you know. He opened a New Testament in Latin. Think of some passage you know well. Nate repeated the opening verse of the book of John. In the beginning was the... Yes, Angus. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Dr. Bentley showed him the same passage in Latin. Stop, Angus. In participle erat simul ili, et sermo ili erat duran ascut ili sermo deres. Nate said, I figured out 3 words already. In is just the same as our word principle in the beginning. Sermo is word. Dr. Bentley nodded. Sermo, S-E-R-M-O. That's where we get our word sermon, he smiled. Oh, you won't have any trouble with Latin. Latin isn't hard. It's Principia that will be hard. It's hard to understand even when you read it. Back in his own room, Nate stared at the Latin books. Could he do it? Well, he could try. One thing he thought, if he ever got a chance to go to Harvard, he'd need to know Latin. Just now, a chance to go to Harvard seemed farther away than ever. But he told himself, you never could tell what might happen. If the chance came, he'd be ready. By the next summer, he had learned enough Latin to begin to translate Principia. It seemed to him that he lived in 2 worlds now. One was the world of the channery, where he kept books and sold marlin spikes, belaying pins, and hemp rope. The other was the world of the universe, where he translated Newton's Principia a word at a time until he had read another sentence. Sometimes he spent a whole evening on 2 or 3 sentences. There was another world too, the world of Salem. Every time Nate went on an errand, he realized how Salem was growing. The men of Salem were proud of their town, their city they called it now. Here it was only 1790. Not even 10 years since we'd won our independence, and Salem had doubled in size. 8,000 people now. The people bragged of the growth of Salem and the daring of her sailors. Elias Hassett Derby's ships were going farther and farther from their home port. As Nate shouldered his way through the crowded wharves, he heard talk of Russia and France and Spain, of Bombay and Calcutta. One day he heard a chance remark that surprised him so much that he walked half a mile out of his way before he remembered where he was supposed to go. "I hear Ropes and Hodges are selling the chandlery," a man remarked. "Samuel Ward is buying it." "You sure?" the other man said. "Well, I haven't seen the papers, but I heard." The man moved out of the earshot. Nate walked on in a daze. Ropes and Hodges selling out? His heart pounded until the blood drummed in his ears. At last his chance was coming. When Ropes and Hodges sold to Chandler, he'd be free. He'd get to go to Harvard after all. 17 wasn't too old. Mr. Morris had said, "If in a year or two something happens and you're free." It had been just 1 year. When Nate got back to the shop, Mr. Ropes was in the doorway. "You're back, Nate? Good. I have something to see about. I'll be gone about an hour. Then Jonathan and I have something to talk over with you." He smiled and was gone. So it was true. Nate smiled too. He went to the desk and started his letter to Mr. Morris. "Since Ropes and Hodges are selling out, I'll be free of my indenture. I can come to Cambridge and tutor your children and study for Harvard. I've been studying Latin for a year now, so..." Nate heard someone enter the shop. He laid down his quill and stood. It was Samuel Ward, the man they said was buying the chandlery. Mr. Ward smiled. "Don't bother about me, Nate. I just dropped in to look around. I don't know if you've heard it yet, but I'm buying the chandlery." Nate grinned. "Congratulations, Mr. Ward. It's a fine chandlery." Mr. Ward smiled too. "And I'll get a fine bookkeeper with it, won't I?" "Yes, sir. I bought it lock, stock, and bookkeeper." Nate could feel the smile getting stiff on his face. Mr. Ward didn't seem to notice. He chuckled at his own joke. "Lock, stock, and bookkeeper. That's pretty good, isn't it?" "Yes, Nate. I brought your indenture right along with the cable and the marlin spikes." Nate forced himself to smile again. "That's right. I come with the rest of the supplies, don't I?" He picked up the letter to Mr. Morris and crushed it in his hand. "What's that? Some figuring?" Mr. Ward asked. "I hear you're quite a hand with figures. I hope I didn't interrupt the problem and mixed you up." "No," Nate told him. "You didn't interrupt anything. It was just a little problem. I know the answer now." He crushed the paper into a hard wad and tossed it into the wastebasket. Yes, he knew the answer. The answer was no freedom until he was 21. 4 more years in the chandlery, then it would be too late for Harvard. He'd still have to sail by Ashbury's. Well, I hope it turns around for him. That's the end of chapter 8. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're reading along. I hope this encourages you to read 30 minutes every day to strengthen your reading muscle. Remember to write me, P.O. Box 232, Old Swainsboro Road, Twin City, Georgia, 30471. Take care. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening and that you study hard. All right. Bye, Angus. See you later.